Hello and welcome back to All Day Play Pretend with your host, Catherine Rossler. So I'm back on the mic today. It's February 1st. Just playing around. I was getting really excited. I was sitting and I basically was just sending voice notes back to a bunch of friends and people that I'm communicating with, and I love, it reminds me that I really do enjoy speaking out loud, even just talking out loud. I feel how powerful it is. And I was like, oh my God, I need to get back on the pod, honey girl, pie, pumpkin, spice, and just yap it out, talk a bit, because it's part of what I want to get into more. I want to just speak more and talk more and do the podcast and just have a lot more fun with being creative and just see where it takes me. So usually when I do hop on here, I just rant kind of about whatever comes to my head. This time I did make it kind of a temporary outline. I guess this is kind of like a life update / where I'm at. If you've been listening to me or if you know me, I've been my nervous system, and I'm going to speak about this in a unique way, which you'll get later on, but my nervous system is doing symptoms of long COVID. So, and to be fair, I am noticing changes. So that's what I'm here to talk about the little positive changes that I'm experiencing with my physical symptoms with long COVID, and honestly, just in life in general. I feel like I've had a really big perspective shift on how to heal and how health kind of functions. If you've been experiencing long COVID or you have something like ME/CFS, so short history on these, it's not something new. We've been experiencing them throughout history and throughout if you ever get an illness or a disease, for example, Ebola. I'm pretty sure Ebola, the biggest one that I can remember is mono. So I don't know if you had this around you when you were in high school, but I remember it being called the kissing disease. You can get it from making out with people or sharing drinks or whatever. You can get mono. And I remember a couple kids having it around me, either in middle school or high school, and then being, out of commission for a couple months. And it was just this thing. But what happens from things like mono or SARS, it's happened from many different viruses, but people develop ME/CFS or these longer term symptoms, and you go to the doctor and they're like, no, nothing's wrong with you, you're fine. But collectively, so many people have experienced this. I've been experiencing this myself. They've termed it long COVID, but basically it's essentially, in my mind, the same thing. I would say why I'm grateful that I have it now is that because so many more people have it, there's so many more resources online, there's so many more communities and people talking about it. There's so much more research that's being done around it and it's being recognized. I did in this past summer, I was part of the UHN and I did a clinical trial for a drug for specifically for long COVID recovery. And anyways, so just to bring you forward I've had experiences, my nervous system has been, doing post-exertional malaise and nerve pain and leg muscle pain and nausea and headaches and many random other things. So I started reading and kind of going into the universe of okay, well, if Western medicine doesn't have they don't know the cause of it, they don't really know. And you can go online and there's so much information. I did read, anyways, you can go online, you can look into everything that you want. I've been there and back. And once you start it seems so everybody that has long COVID gets to this point where they're oh, okay, don't go on Reddit. Don't read into the gloom and doom because that's not helpful. Let's look for positive spaces and people that have recovered. And you go on the internet and there are people that have recovered. They talk about their stories and how they got to them. And a lot of it is unconventional because they aren't backed by like peer-reviewed journals and studies because they aren't really seen maybe as the way, like, I guess they're kind of out of the realm of Western medicine, where they just aren't your typical studies. I don't know. Anyways, so they're not usually, like they're not as, I guess, regulated. So by certain practitioners that aren't, like aren't doctors or aren't maybe certain healthcare professionals, but they've, built certain programs to like help people heal. And a lot of it I do think is we need to look to not just Western medicine, but like medicine around the world and that we've had for history. And one thing that this brings to mind is there's this one video, and it's with Dr. Mike and Dr. K on YouTube. Dr. K is he's a psychiatrist, and he was a monk, and he is specifically looks at like it's like video game addiction. And then Dr. Mike is like I forget what kind of doctor he is, but he's like a bit more of a like holistic doctor. And they were talking specifically about like Ayurveda medicine versus Western medicine. And one point, which I really, really liked, was when Dr. K was talking about meditation and how in a lot of studies of meditation, they don't add in the aspect of like faith or like having that connection to, whatever spirit or higher power or whatever. It's more just looked at like the practice of meditation, and that part is eliminated. And I forget exactly what he said, but he just kind of talks about how like that is something that, that's missing, like how it's missing in the studies and it's not controlled for. And then that brings me to like other things that I've learned recently. Like, for example, in your brain, the pain is experienced in the same part, whether it's physical or emotional. Your brain perceives it in the same part of your brain, which I think is really interesting. Another thing is like when people when people who are really good at meditating, so like your monks or people that are just really skilled in this, certain parts of the brain shut down, or like, I guess, shut down. I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but they are less active, and then they like kind of don't experience like their orientation in space, which I thought was really interesting. And then in my mind, I'm like, oh, that kind of sounds like how people talk about being connected to God or the universe. It's like this connection of everything, and so I think that's really interesting. But so like there's things that are happening in our mind and our bodies, like especially in our bodies, that we can look at the symptoms and we can be like, okay, this is the symptoms that are happening, but what is the cause of it? And then there's other things happening in our bodies where we're like, okay, we, especially with like in neuroscience and to deal with your nervous system, it's like, okay, like, this is what's going on when X, Y, and, when people are meditating or when people are doing this. I guess this is getting a bit more philosophical, but, even when you think of like the concept of like dark matter and how like most of our universe and like is dark matter, and like scientists don't really know what is in black holes, and a lot of things are theory based, on, and you can go deeper that way. So a lot of coming back to alternative things for long COVID. I first was reading, and I don't remember exactly how I found this. When something just kind of comes up again and again and again, and you're like, okay, I need to look more into this. This is like in my zeitgeist, and whatever, the internet or for whatever reason it's throwing it at me. But Dr. Joe Dispenza, he is a chiropractor, talks about how he broke his back and basically how he healed his back with his mind, and how he shares his practices with people all over the world, mostly America. Of course, there are criticisms of him and of many of these practices where, they're preying on the chronically ill and all this stuff. And I totally hear that. And I really did think about these things while I was going into them, because I was like, okay, like this is a valid point to consider. And like seeing what people said, I do think you need to consider all sides of the equation, so to speak. But at the end of the day, it's like up to each individual and what choice they have and having that autonomy. And I think, when you're listening to this, take what you want. If you don't believe it or don't agree with me, well, then you don't. And that's okay. We don't all have to agree on everything. But it kind of came to this point where I was like, okay, like I can't just wait around for somebody to solve this for me, because I was at a point where I was just so miserable, was just in bed most days, was a struggle to get out of bed, was a struggle to make myself food and like do things for myself. And it's been the wildest ride, and I'm still in it to a certain extent. I've definitely made a lot of progress, and I'm super proud of myself for that. And seeing where I was and where I'm at now, it's kind of like a fever dream. You're almost like, was that real? Like, did this really happen? Like, what was even happening? What's been going on? I almost went to Dr. Joe Spenza to see him in LA, but right before, like, I had booked right at the beginning of January, but when I was like about to go, that's when the fires were breaking out in LA. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think it's really appropriate for me to go. Where I was going to stay was basically wasn't an evacuation zone, but it was like a neighborhood right next to it. And I was like, this just feels a little weird for me to do this right now. I feel like if I'm going, I need to be going to support the fires and not something else, not for tourism. Like, that just felt off. And also I wasn't completely in the best frame of mind. I was like, I wasn't feeling complete. I'm like, how will I be doing for 10 days on my own? I hadn't done that in a very long time. I haven't really traveled or, completely been on my own in another place where I don't live at home and have my space. Anyways, so I didn't end up going to his retreat, but then I did find something else called the lightning process. I would say this is in the similar realm of alternative healing, and it's all about how your mind can heal your body. And the lightning process, you can, again, there's controversy about it online, but you can really read and there's like this idea that you're not allowed to speak about, but yeah, you can talk about it, you can find about all the information online. And I found about it in a video that I watched where there's this one girl, she did it, and she was like, I did it in a weekend and I healed within 3 days. And so, like, there's a lot of people with stories like this, and I was like, that's insane. But I mean, I want that, I need it. What is this about? So there's different steps to the process. So first, it's you download and listen to the recordings. Then you have a practitioner that teaches you, and this is a training. It's not a therapy. It's a training. You do the training, and then after, you have a few follow-up calls, and you just continue to do the training and continue to keep the learnings. And this is one of the many things that has been on my radar and I've been looking into. I also read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, read partial parts of the book Anchored. I took a breathing course with breathing for long COVID with Vicky. I guess that's also something I can put in the show notes. But so that I learned so much about like the nervous system and our diaphragm and breathing, and more about how like things like long COVID exist in our bodies and how it's a disruption of the nervous system, basically. I wouldn't say what's another book? The Way Out. That's another book that I listened to on audiobook. And the way they describe it in like The Way Out is that your nervous system is sending false alarms of pain to your body, or false alarms to whatever your symptom is. And over time and accumulation, the idea is for so long, if your body's stressed, and I say not stress like emotional stress, but stressors on your body, then you'll create a alarm system, and this alarm system is trying to tell your body something, that you're unsafe, but really you are safe. It's like messages have kind of gotten mixed up, or like have become more extreme than they need to be. And then when your body's in that state, if your body's in this state of panic, like your nervous system, then that's going to affect it affects your digestive system, it affects your breathing, it affects your hormones, and the way all these things, they just talk about how, everything is interconnected, and how with brain retraining, that's another thing that these are all very similar to, is like how when you notice in your brain that you're starting a neural pathway that is unhelpful, how do you catch it so that you can create new neural pathways? That's what a lot of this comes down to, is about like our neural pathways are plastic, like they are malleable. And I mean, if you want to get into like where this is used in like a therapy, this is like the basics of CBT therapy is you notice a thought, you notice a feeling that is, label, is it catastrophizing, is black or white thinking, and then what's it thought you want to replace it with, and you kind of like go through that process. And that's basically all this is. I'd say this is like another approach to CBT, but it's a bit more broad, and it's not just how you're feeling, but it's also like, well, how are you physically as a person? The belief that yes, our brains are neuroplastic, we can make the changes. So if your brain is the neuroplasticity has formed to have long COVID, you can change your neuroplasticity to not having it or to be healthy and healing. Anyways, I hope this all makes sense. So the lightning process is this dude called Phil Parker. His again, similar to Joe Dispenza, he talks about how he severed his, like, it's some of like the, I don't know if it's an artery, or he basically cut his wrist very, very badly, and he wasn't able to move it, and he was told he would never be able to use it again. And then how he used neuroplasticity to get movement back into his hand, and just like the faith and the belief that this is possible. In the lightning process, basically you listen to this like 2 or 3 hour long pre-recording, and it talks a lot about like, you know, what neuroplasticity is, how we can change it, shares a lot of stories of people that have changed, and like gets into the details of it. Then there's like a brief moment talking about basically this is a training, and it's going to be, you're going to have a coach, and your coach is you, and your coach is going to coach you through this. Then you meet with your practitioner, and again, you kind of go through what you kind of listen to on the recordings, and then you do what is called the lightning process in person. So you stand up, you're in the present moment, and you kind of like walk. It's like think of it as like a theater practice. Like you're standing in one spot, and then if you were to stand directly opposite of yourself, that's the coach, and you kind of switch between these two spots. So first you're in the present, tell yourself to pause or stop. Then you choose, oh yeah, I forgot to talk about the pit. So the pit, as defined by Phil Parker, is anything that is not life enhancing. So if you're, for example, I sometimes do, oh yeah, this is another thing I've talked about, DU. So, okay, so the pit is anything that is not life enhancing. For example, and the other thing that he talks about is this verb he's created called DU with like a, I don't know, an accent, a roof accent on top. I don't know what you call it. Do or doing or did with, and so it's different than the DO, it's DU. And this new verb he's talking about is to create separation between your symptom and your experience and yourself. And honestly, this to me feels very much like the id, the ego, your ego and your subconscious or whatever. And I forget exactly what those are, but it looks very similar to that. Like you'll hear like Eckhart Tolle or different practitioners talk about I know there's another woman that I listen to on Insight Timer, Meredith Hook, and she talks about this. But so yeah, there's like having this understanding of a separation of self is what the doing does. So sometimes I do fear about I'll do fear about after I've done this activity, I will experience PEM. And so the idea is that you separate yourself from this symptom, and then it gives you the power to have a change and influence in it. So for example, I would then be able to be like, oh, okay, that's you know, I can make a change and I can influence this. So then you would kind of say stop to that feeling of fear. Then you would step again into the choice position, which is, do you want to coach yourself or do you want to stay in the pit? So the pit, again, is anything that's not life enhancing. And this doesn't mean that it's everything has to be positive, because that's not true. You know, sometimes sadness can be life enhancing. If you go watch the movie Inside Out, if you haven't seen that, I watch that when I need to understand my emotions, and I cry every time, and I love it so much, and it makes me feel better. Because it's like, oh no, this is what's going on inside my head. It's not me. It's this symphony of neurons that are going on inside me. And so then you either choose to continue in the pit or step into your coach position. And this sounds a lot, I think, simpler than it is in practice. It takes work and it takes effort, and sometimes you get blocks. Anyway, so you step into the coach, and then you have to be really, the idea is to be congruent in, you know, how you're speaking to yourself. So you have to say to your present self, you know, I'm so proud of you. Thank you for, if you can catch that, if you can do that, you can do anything. You're a powerful genius. I love you so much. I'm so proud of you. Then you step into your present self and you would say, thank you. And you have to practice receiving that because that's another thing. You have to practice receiving that gratitude and that praise, and that what your coach is saying. And I think the idea here is to get you into knowing that you're in a place of safety, and to try to push that into your subconscious mind. And then you'd go back to your coach and say, and what do you want? You go back to the present self and you'd say, I want to be at ease, and I want to feel powerful after I go on this walk, instead of having fear about it. And then you step in the coach, you say, how are you going to do that? You step in the present, and there's many different things that you could do. But basically, you're trying to coach yourself through this, and you want to get yourself to an improved state of being, whether that be emotional or physical, but you want to improve your state of being. And this is kind of where it's like, okay, this is the active process of your neuroplasticity changing. And yeah, so I find certain things, and this is where I'd say, I do certain things that are difficult about it. I find sometimes even doing the process gives me anxiety about it. So you see, it can get a bit confusing. That's why sometimes I've been trying to say, like, oh, my nervous system, like my neuroplasticity is doing anxiety right now. And then it kind of helps me separate the DU from the DO. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyways, so that is one thing. Another thing, and again, like all of these things, to me, it's just like they're all interconnected. I don't know if I was saying this here, maybe it was to friends earlier, but it's like this idea of, manifestation and prayer and self-development and all these things. They're all just like the same thing, but people just explain them differently. Goal setting could be really seen the same as manifestation and all this. And yeah, so they all like cross over. They're all similar. Everything's so similar. But I'm on the Brain. If you haven't seen her or heard of her, she is a creator online, and she's a neuroscientist, and she talks about the neuroscience of manifestation. And I really, really like it, because if you are a bit like me and you can kind of get a bit skeptical, tapping into the science behind certain things, for example, like the reticular activating system. I love this one, and we talked about this in the lightning process, but you've probably done the thing where it's like, okay, look at this picture and remember, we're going to look at it for 10 seconds and find everything that's red. So you see a red pillow, you see a red book, you see a red t-shirt, a red carpet, a red balloon. Picture goes away. And then the question is, well, what did you see that's blue? Well, you didn't, because you were focusing on what was red. And that's what kind of the idea of what the reticular activating system does. It filters or edits your world to see what you're telling it to see. Anyway, so cool things like that. And then she always like relates them back to manifestation, how you can like improve your life and improve your well-being. And the other girl that I've really been into, her name is Esther, and she has a podcast called Esther's Universe. She also has an app called the Theta app, which I really like and I'm using now. And she has like meditations and a bit of hypnosis, information on like neuroplasticity as well. I like Esther because she's kind of in between the science and the spiritual. She kind of like links the two, because honestly, like I really believe if you've heard of the term pantheism, that kind of is where I have fallen into like what my belief system is. God, spirituality, or God or religion or whatever, and science and nature, it's all the same thing. Like I really think it's all the same thing. We just call it different things. It's all stories, humans are storytellers, and we create the narratives of our world how we best see fit with the knowledge we have at the times that we do. Each of us also has such a unique life experience. Like there's like 8 billion of us on this earth. And if you think about, this is always a trip for me. If you think about million to billion, if million was 11 days, billion is like 37 years. So if there are 8 billion people on this planet, if I'm getting this correctly, nobody would be alive. We would all be deceased unless we change something. But let's check Google. Billion is equal to 37 years. So, and I forgot to say, the measurement is in seconds. So if 1 million is 11 days in seconds, 1 billion is equal to 32. I exaggerated a little bit. 1 billion seconds, a bit over 31 and a half years. Yeah. So 31. Okay, so they round to 32. But if we think about that, like, to put this into perspective, like, there's billions of us on this planet, and each person has had a unique experience. And I know there's a word for this, but we each are so interested in ourselves. I mean, especially in where I live in Canada, but in more Western culture, there's individualism, and like, just think of how complex you are as a person and how much is going on in your mind. And like, even in each of us, we have billions of neurons, right? Like, okay, now I have to ask this. How many neurons do I have? The human brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. So if each individual has 86 billion neurons, think of all the unique pathways and connections that can make. And then there's 8 billion of us. So like 80, I don't know the math on that. Somebody do the math. But 86 billion neurons, like, how many neural different connections can that be? Like, we're just so complex, and it's so beautiful and so interesting. But yeah, so we each have our own unique perspective of the world. And that's why I think when we always talk about like religion or science or all this stuff, I'm like, dude, we're just explaining things in different ways, which I think often is a lot of miscommunication comes down to, is like, okay, well, tell me what like exactly your experience is and where you're coming from, so we can like meet on the same page and like have a mutual understanding. Anyways, I think I keep saying anyways, and hopefully I'm not saying too much. I'm really not trying to. I want to eliminate those filler words from my vocabulary because they are very difficult to edit out post. And I don't want to do that. I honestly just want to just record and then post, because I don't want to edit. I mean, it is kind of cool to listen back, but I have this resistance to doing it. I'd rather somebody else were to do it. Intention setting is another thing that kind of keeps coming up with this. Same with, it was in the lightning process. Em on the Brain talks about, Esther talks about this, but setting the intention. So that aligns with kind of like your reticular activating system, your RAS, where if you're like, today I'm going to have an amazing day. Today's going to be such a good day. Like, show me how good it can get. Your brain is going to look for the things that align with that intention. Same with gratitude. Gratitude is seen as like one of the highest vibing, one of the highest vibing emotions. So the more gratitude that you see and feel in your day, you will then foster more of that feeling. And that's, if you talk about like what manifestation is, this idea that, and I really like the way Em on the Brain talks about it. She's like, it is you don't want what you want. You want the feeling that you think what you want is going to give you. And tapping into gratitude and being more grateful is the way to feel how you want to feel. I think ultimately we all want to feel love, joy, and happiness at the end of the day. And that's why we're also obsessed with consuming and trying to fill up the holes inside of us with things outside of us. Oh yeah, my next note on here, so I'm just looking at my notes on my iPhone, is healing through speaking. And I really do like speaking. I like being able to flow with all my ideas. And I think this is something I've always really liked. I found it through writing, and I've kind of found it through art. But there is something really, really beautiful about the spoken voice. Like, I love talking to people, and I love just like sharing and being able to talk a lot, and then people like listening to me. Like, it is really nice. Also, I've been told, and let me know if you agree with this, I have a really good radio voice. I've been told this many, many times. So I was like, you know what? Let me do a service to the world and just share this podcast more. Next notes. I talked about Dr. K and Dr. Mike. I talked about the holistic approach to health. Oh yeah, your inner coach, shadow. Okay, so then your inner coach. I guess this is where I'm starting to bring everything all together. So a big thing of that in the lightning process is your inner coach. I base my inner coach, or I feel like I have a couple inner coaches, a couple mentors, if you want to think of them that way, that will pop in my head and that I gather inspiration from when I'm speaking to myself. But a huge thing about the inner coach, and just like I think it's a lot about recognizing how you speak to yourself and how you react to how you're reacting. So let me take this back to when I first was experiencing a lot of mental health struggles in my youth and my early 20s. There's one thing that is talked about. I think Bell Let's talks about this, but the idea of like the stigma around mental health is actually often more harmful than mental health. And stigma, I mean, you can have stigma towards yourself, but just this idea of, like judging that emotion or judging that experience, that's kind of where that adds like this extra layer of pain. And I think what I've discovered through doing the lightning process is thinking, oh, like, how do I speak to myself on a daily basis? Like, where are my thoughts really at? What are my intentions? Like, what are my beliefs? What am I looking at and what am I projecting out into the world? Because if like our neural pathways, they're kind of set in a certain way. And the more, I'm sure if you've heard this story, but you walk down, it's like you walk down the same path every day over a field. I'm sure, trying to imagine that. Like, you've probably walked on a path that wasn't a man-made path, or wasn't a path, an industrial path, like a cement road, but a path that was created by people. And over time, over years and years, it's become a dirt path. And through, whether it's through a lawn or like a park or a forest, and now it's become a path that people go down all the time. And now it's just a regular path. It's become part of the system. And that's kind of how our brains are. Like, the more that you go down and the more that you do whatever action, thought, or behavior it is, it becomes they become automatic. And so all of this is about catching yourself in those automatic processes and being like, okay, how do we change that? And one thing I noticed was how I am very hard on myself. I've always been very hard on myself and the idea, and I came to this, I think I come to this idea again and again, and it's just something I have to remind myself of and where I'm switching. But it's almost like there were these goalposts, and maybe I picked this up from someone else, but the idea that there's these goalposts that I can never reach. And the idea of like, I'll be good enough when I blank. I'll be good enough when I make this amount of money. I'll be good enough when I have a partner. I'll be good enough when I have this job. I'll be good enough when I make this amount of money from my art. But the thing is that sentence never changes. I'll be good enough when never changes, because it's like that path. You always walk down that path. So you'll never reach when, because when has to be now. The only moment that really exists in our world is now. The future is now, the past is now, in the perspective of it's how you remember and how you interpret it. When you're anxious or anticipation of something that is about to happen or something that might happen, that thing actually hasn't happened yet. So the anxiety that you're currently feeling about it is the present. Like, that is your perspective of the future in the present. The future, we don't actually have the future. And we will never have the future, because all we have is the present moment. We don't time travel. We don't jump ahead. But yeah, so I noticed how I speak to myself in this kind of never ending like goalposts that I don't reach. And also that I kind of like more of a pushing or like questioning of like, oh, what's wrong? Like, what can I fix? Like, how can I be better? Instead of being like, oh, you did a really good job, Catherine. I'm really proud of you for getting up today and brushing your hair. I'm really proud of you for making your bed today. I'm really proud of you for recognizing, and this is where, if you remember what I was talking about, the lightning process, I'm really happy for you for recognizing that you were falling into the pit. You were going down that old neural pathway, and now you've picked a new one. And that is like the sweet spot. But it's really helped me to understand and to begin to change and compassionately care and talk to myself with kindness and love and compassion. And then ultimately, if you get into like the spiritual side of things, it's more like, well, then that's how we change the world, is when you're compassionate and loving to yourself, you can be more compassionate and loving to others. Doesn't mean that you have to tolerate or be around others all the time. You still have your boundaries. When you are triggered or something bothers you, you can recognize like, oh, okay, that's not that person. I'm having that reaction, and it's up to me if I want to feel different. We are the only people in control of our own selves. Like, we can't control anything but our own selves. So you better get in control of your own boat. because you got to stay afloat, motherfucker. And my next two notes, are we recording properly? Imagine I wasn't recording. I would cry. I can't see. Oh my God. Am I? I think I am. No, all the lights are on. The red light is on. Just because I don't see it properly. Anyways, my next note says shadow work, inner child work, parts work, resistance. So, and I'm probably not getting all the analogies here, but if you've heard of shadow work, if you've heard of inner child work, if you've heard of parts work, or like resistance, or like, the parts of yourself that you want to change, or like maybe if you're feeling really angry or anxious or whatever, it's the idea is that, these are the parts of ourselves that we need to look at and care for. And they're not bad parts, but usually like they're trying to protect us in some shape or form. And in trying to protect us, they also block us from experiencing the state of the universe, how it is, how it really truly is, and not our perception of it and our judgment of it, aka and of ourselves, because we are a part of the world. Whether or not you agree with like universe and like spiritual higher things, just the idea, like we even talked about this in like AA, where it's like you just have to pick something, like all of this is really about recognizing that you are not the center of the universe. There are billions of people. You can't control the billions of people. You can't control the ocean. You can't control the weather. There's something bigger than you, and you are a part of it. Whether we're not physically attached to it. We are made up of, I think we're made up of carbon, but we're all, we've all come from the same origin story, whatever origin story you think that is. We've all evolved together, and we're here today. I think it's all about recognizing that is bigger than us. And that is what my understanding is, that whatever you believe is bigger than us, be that you call it God or spirit of the universe, or just that the world is bigger than us and I am a part of it. That is what it's all about. But that's when you come back to shadow work, for example. Shadow work is looking at, okay, but yeah, just kind of like, what are the different parts of me that we experience and we perceive as negative? And same, if you've heard of parts work in internal family systems, you have firefighters, you have managers, you have things that are trying to protect like your inner child from different experiences that you've had in the world. And by working on ourselves, and not to say that there's anything wrong with us, because there really isn't anything wrong with us. Something happened. It died. I replaced the batteries, but that was weird. I guess maybe it was the battery. I thought they were new batteries. So yeah, I was talking about shadow work, inner child work, parts work. So, it's about giving compassion to these parts of ourselves that feel difficult for us to manage. And that's where the coach comes in. It's that voice that you can have inside your head that's encouraging and compassionate. And ultimately, these parts of ourselves need love. They are parts of ourselves that when we were younger, when we were children, we didn't have the skills to manage them. So we created these other parts of ourselves, these shadows, to protect us so that wouldn't happen again, because we were unable to really deal with it when we were kids. And, I think no matter who you are, no matter what your experiences were as a kid, how traumatic they were, and what life was like, these things are something, I think it's a universal human experience, and we just need to give ourselves lots of love and compassion and understand these parts of ourselves and parent them. I guess that's, where inner child work is, that you want to parent these inner parts of yourselves and understand them, and, let them know that you don't have to be this strong person anymore. You don't need to put up that defense anymore. Like, everything's okay and it's different now. We're not in that place. Again, our neural pathways, these are neural pathways that were created, and then we just kept walking down them years and years and years. And now you come to a place when you're like, oh, okay, how these aren't really serving me anymore. And maybe I had something wrong from before, and nothing's wrong with me. There's nothing wrong about them. But now I'm in a better place where I can bring love and compassion to them. Another idea that kind of integrates with this is how the outer world doesn't really exist. I'm on the Brain talks about there's another girl called Love Again Jen I've seen her on YouTube. She talks about it. But this idea that, and I'm honestly, I swear all these ideas are just like floating around on TikTok. I've seen a lot of them on TikTok as well. but the outer world is just a mirror of our inner world. Our eyes don't actually see. Our eyes perceive what's around us and then send signals to our brain, which creates a picture. There's probably lots of things that are not in the visible spectrum that we don't see. Another take on this is, we create understanding and meaning from looking at our world around us. And it's not like if somebody says something mean to me and I get angry or I get sad, that person didn't make me sad or angry. My reaction to them was being sad or angry. And same thing, well, like if you look at the sky and it's raining and you're like, oh, I hate the rain, and then it makes you sad, versus, oh, I love the rain, then it makes you happy. It's your interpretation of the world around you. And when you react quickly to something, it's the world reminding you or showing you what maybe your shadows are when it's more of an uncomfortable experience and something that you do want to understand and change. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the understanding is that the world is abundant, just like the universe is ever expanding, and there's at the true core of human experience is creativity, and creativity is a form of, I think, love, if you think about it, if you want to get even more philosophical, of life. The creation of life is creative, and that is just a pure experience of love. And then, yeah, that's all that it all comes down to. So I'm going to end this here. I am getting hungry, and I'm also recognizing currently that, well, one, I need to coach myself after this and just let myself know. Actually, maybe I'll do it here. So I'm just going to say, oh, Catherine, you did such a good job. I'm so proud of you for recording this podcast. You're great. You're so great. I love you so much. You're so cool. Thank you for doing this. This was a lot of fun. I know you had so much fun. How are you doing? And I'd maybe talk back to myself and be like, yeah, thanks. I'm experiencing little doing fatigue. And my coach, oh yeah, I understand that. Sending you some love, compassionate love for that. 'Cause you did a lot today, and talking for this long is actually can be exhausting. And how do you want to feel? Oh, I want to feel content and at ease and happy. And yeah, so I'm going to keep on doing that. I'm going to keep on keeping on, being proud of myself, giving myself some compassion. I hope you do too. Hope you have a lovely day, evening, life. Thank you for listening, and I will definitely be back soon. Fingers crossed. I'm hoping to make this a part of my routine and do these episodes more regularly, checking in and just sharing all the brain things that are going on in my head. I do have plans and ideas for the podcast, so I'll definitely share that. It's always evolving and changing, but for now, it's just me signing off. Have a lovely day.